You think some things are wrong: murder, rape, torture, child abuse. You feel it in your gut, a visceral, almost physical certainty that these things are wrong. These things are evil, not just unpleasant, not just inconvenient, wrong, cosmically, objectively, almost wrong. But here's the thing, I understand that feeling too. But the feeling sometimes does not make it real. Humans felt that sun revolving around the earth for thousands of years. It felt obvious, it felt undeniable. Every single morning there it was, rising in the east, crossing the sky, setting in the west. The evidence was right there in front of everyone. But it was completely wrong. What I am going to argue today is the morality, the idea that some actions are objectively, universally, cosmically right or wrong is in the same category. It is one of the most powerful, most persistent, most deeply felt illusions in human history. An illusion so convincing that questioning it feels not just wrong, but monstrous. That discomfort you are feeling right now, that's exactly what I want to examine. Because the greatest philosophers who ever lived, people who dedicated their entire existence to understand what is real, kept arriving at the same disturbing conclusions. Morality, as we imagine it, is a human construction, a story we tell, a fantasy we share, but it's time we look at it honestly. Part 1. What are we actually claiming when we say something is wrong? Before we ask whether morality is real, we need to understand what kind of claim we are actually making when we use moral language. When you are saying murder is wrong, you are not just saying I don't like murder. You are not just saying murder makes me feel bad. You are actually making what philosophers call a moral realist claim. The claim that wrongness is a real property of fact, independent of what anyone thinks or feels about it. That murders would be wrong even if everyone in the earth decided it was fine, even if evolution had wired us to enjoy it, even if no God existed to condemn it. This is what most people call belief, not just the morality of their preference, but that is real, objective, out there in the universe waiting to be discovered like a mathematics or physics. This view is called a moral realism, and it is the common sense view. It's also view that is under serious philosophical examination falls apart. The alternative views are moral anti-realism, the position that the moral facts don't exist independently of mind. This breaks into several camps. Moral realism says moral truths are relative to culture or individuals. Error theory, the view we will spend a lot of time on, says moral claims are meant to be objective but not simply, systematically false because there are no moral facts. Expressivism says moral statements aren't even truth claims, they are just expression of emotions or attitude, like cheering for certain sports team. And then there is moral nihilism, the most radical point and position that morality is not just a culturally constructed or false, but fundamentally meaningless as a category of reality. Each of these positions had been defended by serious, brilliant philosophers. Together, they build an overwhelming case that morality you believe in, objective, universe, cosmic, does not exist. Let's go through with the evidence. Part 2. David Hume and the is out program. The foundation collapse. We begin in 18th century Scotland with the philosopher who more than anyone else exposed the darkest crack in the foundation of moral philosophy, David Hume. Hume noticed something that sounded simple but is, once you grasp it, completely devastating. There is an unbridgeable logic gap between facts about what is conclusions and what ought to be. From any set of descriptive facts, facts about how the world is, you cannot logically derive a moral conclusion. The leap from is to out is not a simple step, it is a leap of faith, a smuggled assumption, a hidden premises that was never proven. Here is what this means in practice. Take any moral argument you find compelling. animals suffer, therefore we ought not to cause animal suffering. This first statement is a fact, the second is a moral conclusion, but the logical bridge between them, the premises that says the suffering matters morally, that it creates an obligation, that bridge is not factual, it is itself a moral assumption. It was sneaked in or tried this one. Human beings have evolved to cooperate in social groups, therefore we ought to be moral. Again, this fact is evolution tells nothing more about what you should do. Plenty of things evolved, rape evolved, tribalism evolved, genocide evolved in its own way. Evolution is descriptive, moral is prescriptive, and you cannot get the second from the first without assuming a moral framework. This is Hume's famous is out problem, sometimes called the Hume's gluttony, because it cleanly severs facts from value. And it is not a fringe observation, it is one of the most widely accepted conclusions in the history of analytical philosophy. What it means is this: no one has ever successfully derived a moral out from purely factual premises. Every moral system underneath reacts on the fundamental assumption that it itself is a moral preference, not a discovery. Hume went further. He argued that our moral judgments are not a product of reasons at all. They are products of sentiment, of feelings, of emotional response. In this treatise of human nature, he wrote the reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passion. It can tell us about how to achieve our desires, but it cannot tell us what to desire. Morality for Hume was ultimately about how thing makes us feel, and the feeling, however powerful, are not cosmic facts. Part 3, Nietzsche, the genealogy of morality. Now let's bring in the philosopher who took the hammer to the moral philosophy and never looked back. Nietzsche did not just argue that objective morality does not exist. He went further. He argued that morality as we know it is a specific historical product born from a specific psychological situation designed to serve a specific political purpose. And once you see its origins, you can never take it at a face value again. In his masterwork on the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche conducted what he called a genealogy, not a justification of moral values, but an investigation into where they actually came from, and what he actually found was not pretty. He argued that the dominant moral framework in Western civilization, the morality of good and evil, or sin of redemption, of humility and self-sacrifice, did not emerge from careful philosophical reasoning. It did not descend from heaven. It did not discover in structure of cosmos. It was invented by weak as a weapon against strong. Nietzsche described two fundamental types of morality, master morality and slave morality. Master morality was the original value system of ancient aristocratic societies. The noble class defined good as whatever they were: powerful, healthy, proud, activity, life-affirming. Bad simply meant weak, inferior, low. There was no deep moral condemnation in bad. It was simply a category of the lesser. But then came what Nietzsche called the slave riot in morality. The powerless, unable to overcome the power through strength, staged a psychological revolution. They invented the value system entirely. What was good, power, pride, excellence, became evil. What was bad, weakness, humility, suffering, became good. Through this inversion, Christianity became the prime vehicle of what Nietzsche called the resentment, a French word of a specific kind of festering, impotent resentment that transforms into creative force by redefining values. The slave does not say, "I am weak and I hate you for being strong." The slave says, "You are evil for being strong, and I am virtuous for being weak." Suddenly, meekness is a virtue, suffering is a noble, ambition is a sin, pride is the greatest of evil, and the powerful, who were simply being what they were, and now cosmically condemned. Nietzsche's argument is not that the powerful are right and weak are wrong. His argument is that neither side has access to moral truth. Because moral truth does not exist, both people are operating from psychological needs, from will to power, for survival to strategy. The moral language they use, good, evil, sin, virtue, is not a description of the universe, it is a weapon, and this weapon has been extraordinarily effective. Nietzsche watched this as a mixture of horror and fascination. As a slave morality conquered the Western world, not through logical argument, but through guilt, through promise of redemption, through the psychological seduction of meaning and suffering. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche made his most radical claim that the entire framework of good and evil needs to be transcended, not replaced with another moral system, transcended. The philosopher of the future, what he called the free spirit, must go beyond morality, recognizing it as a human, all too human creation, and begin to create value consciously rather than inheriting them unconsciously. The implication is clear: moral truths are not truths, they are values, and values are created, not discovered. Part 4: J.L. Mackie and the Argument from Queerness. Let's bring in one of the 20th century sharpest moral philosopher, J.L. Mackie. Mackie was not a romantic rebel like Nietzsche. He was a rigorous analytical philosopher trained in the tradition of precise logical argument, and in his 1977 book of ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong, he made one of the cleanest, most devastating case against moral realism ever written. Mackie called his position error theory. The core claim: moral statements are intended to be objective, but there are no objective moral facts. Therefore, all moral claims are, strictly speaking, false. Not false because they are badly reasoned, false because they are trying to describe something that does not exist. He built his case on two arguments. First, the first argument is the argument of relativity. If there were objective moral facts, facts about wrongness and righteousness, as real as facts about chemistry, we would expect human moral beliefs to converge the way scientific beliefs converge when people investigate the same physical reality. What we see is radical, more disagreement across culture, across over time. Ancient Rome saw gladiatorial combat as entertaining and a civic virtue. Many societies have practiced honor of killing and ritual human sacrifice not reluctantly, but as an expression of their deepest values. Slavery was not just tolerated but philosophically defended by some of the greatest minds in history, including Aristotle. Most relativism explains this perfectly. Different cultures have different values, and moral facts are just culture norms. But if moral realism is true, if there were objective moral facts waiting to be discovered, this degree of persistent disagreement would be very strange. We don't see this level of disagreement about whether Earth orbits about Sun or whether water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. The second argument is more philosophical, interesting one, the argument from queerness. Mackie asked, if objective moral facts existed, what kind of things would they be? They would have to be radically unlike anything else in a natural world. They would have to be facts by their very nature, motivate actions in anyone who perceives them, not just facts that you could know and ignore, facts whose very recognition would compel you to care. But what is that? Where in the universe do we find this kind of entity, a fact that is simultaneously descriptive and inherently motivating? Electrons don't care whether you are a good person. Gravity don't reward virtue. The laws of physics have no moral constraint whatsoever. Objective moral facts would be, in Mackie's memorable phrase, metaphysically queer, so utterly unlike anything else in the natural world that we would need an equally strange faculty to perceive them, some kind of moral institution or sixth sense. And indeed, moral realists often do appeal to this institution, to the feeling that some things are just obviously wrong. But Mackie's response is sharp. The fact that you have strong moral institution doesn't prove those institutions are tracking real moral facts. Evolution gave you those institutions not because they were useful for survival, not because they were map out cosmic moral truth. You can explain the existence of moral feelings entirely through biology and culture without invoking moral facts at all. And even if you can explain the data without the entity, you don't need the entity. Moral facts in Mackie's framework was like ghosts. People believed in them, feel them, organize their lives around them, but the feeling can be explained without the ghost being real. Part 5: Jean-Paul Sartre, Existence Before Essence. Now let's go somewhere more existential, to the cafes of post-war of Paris, and to Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre's contribution in this conversation comes from a different angle. He wasn't primarily arguing the moral facts doesn't exist. He was arguing something that leads to the same unsettling conclusion. that humans exist in the universe without pre-given values, and this is the fundamental truth of human condition. Sartre's famous phrase is existence precedes essence. In the medieval worldview, and in any worldview that includes a god, there is an essence, a purpose, a nature. Before the existence in the world, a knife has an essence to cut, conceived to be knife maker before a knife is made. A human being in religion, in a view, has essence, a soul, a purpose, a moral nature, conceived by God before birth. Moral flows from essence. Sartre said, take God away. There is no pre-given essence for anything. Humans exist first thrown into the world without purpose, without nature, without predetermined moral code, and only then, through their choices, do they create their own essence. This is simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Sartre called it a radical freedom, and unlike the question of free will, Sartre believes that we are condemned to it. We cannot escape choosing. Even refusing to choose is a choice, and there is no cosmic guidebook, no moral instruction manual, no objective right answer waiting to be discovered. What does morality look like in Sartre's universe? It becomes authenticity, the honest acknowledgement of your freedom and responsibility that comes with it. Bad faith. Sartre's term for one of the greatest human failures is the act of pretending that you have no choice, pretending that morality is given, fixed, discovered, rather than chosen and created. That person who says, I have no choice, or that's just wrong, everyone knows it, is hiding from the abyss of their own freedom. Sartre don't say this makes everything permitted. He said it makes everything chosen, that you must own your own choices completely, with no metaphysical escape hatched into objective moral law. These implications are radical. If there is no God, there is no pre-given human essence, then there are no pre-given moral obligations. Every moral system, every religion, every culture, every ethical philosophy in human construction. Some constructions are more coherent, more compassionate, more conceived to human flourishing than others, but none of them are cosmic facts, none of them are discovered, all of them are made. Part 6. More psychology. Jonathan Haidt, elephant in the room. At this point, someone might say, fine, maybe the philosophers disagree, but doesn't the sheer universality of certain moral institutions suggest something is real? Don't all humans everywhere feel that murder is wrong, that fairness matters, that cruelty is bad? Doesn't that convergence to point is something objective? This is actually a powerful objection, and it deserves a powerful answer. Enter Jonathan Haidt, one of the most important moral philosophers and psychologists of the last 50 years, and the authors of The Righteous Mind. Haidt's research reveals something that should permanently change how you think about your moral convictions. He found that people almost never arrive at moral conclusions through reasoning. Instead, the process works the other way around. You feel a moral response first, immediate, automatic, visceral, and then your reasoning mind constructs justification for it afterwards. He calls moral reasoning post hoc realization, not a genuine search for truth, but a lawyer's brief for conclusions already reached by emotion. He demonstrated this with experiments using what he called harmless taboo violations. He would present people with scenarios designed to trigger moral disgust: a family eating their dead dog, a man cleaning his toilet with an American flag, a brother and sister having consensual sex once, using protection, never telling anyone, but both reporting it brought them closer. No harm was done in any scenario, no victim existed, and yet people overwhelmingly reported these acts are wrong, morally wrong. When paused to explain why, they struggled, because there was no rational justification to find. Haidt called this state moral dumbfounding, the experience of being certain that something is wrong without being able to explain why. The conclusion Haidt drew is both simply are staggering. Our moral judgments are primarily emotional reactions shaped by the evolutions and culture that we dress up in the language of reasons and objectivity. He identifies 6 moral foundations, basic categories for moral concern that seems to appear across cultures: care, harm, fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, sanctity, degradation, and liberty, oppression. These foundations appear universal because they were evolutionary, useful in social groups, not because they map onto cosmic moral truth. And different political groups weight this foundation differently. What one culture considers as sacred moral obligations, another considers irrelevant, and same neutral machinery, the same moral emotional system, produces radically different moral conclusions depending on culture input. This does not mean all moral systems are equally good. Haidt is careful about this, but it does not mean that the feeling of moral certainty is good. The gut conviction that something is objectively cosmically wrong is a feeling produced by biology and culture, not a perception of moral reality. Your moral compass is real, it genuinely points somewhere, but it doesn't point to objective moral truth. It points to the value your brain was shaped to feel by millions of years of evolution and decades of cultural programming. Part 7: The Emotionally Debunking Argument. What Haidt psychologically implies, philosopher Sharon made explicitly in one of the most important papers in contemporary moral philosophy, A Darwinian Dilemma for Realist Theories of Value, 2006. Street posted simple but devastating dilemma for anyone who believes in objective moral facts. Evolution shapes our moral institutions. This is not controversial. It is established science. Our sense of care for our children, disgust at certain acts, preference of fairness, loyalty to our group, all of these have evolutionary histories. They were selected because they helped our ancestors survive and reproduce. Now, if objective moral fact exists, there are only two possibilities for how our evolved moral institutions relates to them. Option 1: evolution happened to track moral facts. Natural selection, as it shaped our moral psychology, happened to align with what is objectively right and wrong. But this is wildly impossible. Evolution is blind. It selects for reproductive fitness, not moral truth. There is no reason to think that traits that helped our ancestors survive in the Pleistocene map onto objective moral reality. Evolution gave us tribalism and group favorism, violent response to the perceived threats, and deep indifference to the suffering of strangers. If we are tracking moral facts, evolution is doing an extraordinarily poor and selective job. Option 2: our evolved moral institutions have no systematic connection to objective moral facts. But then, what are we doing when we do moral philosophy? We are starting from the institutions that have no reliable connection to moral truth, using reasons to systematize those institutions and calling the results a moral theory. Either way, moral realism is in serious trouble. Either our moral institutions were shaped to build evolutionary pressure, or moral facts were somehow shaping evolution. Street's conclusion, shared by philosophers like Richard Joyce in The Myth of Morality, in the most parsimonious explanation is simply this: there are no objective moral facts. Our moral institutions are evolutionary adaptations. They feel authoritative and universal because feeling authoritative and universal made them more effective, not because they correspond to anything outside human minds. Part 8: But what about mathematical morality? Peter Singer and the limits of rationalism. At this point, I want to address the most sophisticated defense of moral realism, the view associated with philosophers like Peter Singer and the utilitarian tradition. Singer argues that morality at its core is just the rationality applied to interest. Suffering is bad, not as a cosmic fact, but as a logical starting point, self-evident in a way that mathematical axiom and self-evident. From the badness of suffering, we can construct an objective moral system through pure reasoning, maximize well-being, minimize suffering, treat equal interest equally. Singer's argument had real power. It explains a lot of our moral institutions and extends them constantly in a way that reveals hidden contradictions, like the argument that if we save a drowning child at minimal cost to ourselves, but don't act the same way towards dying children in other countries whom we could save with a small donation, we are being irrational rather than just personally preferred. But here's the problem. Why should we accept the badness of suffering as a logical axiom? Singer would say that it's self-evident that anyone who genuinely understood what suffering was would recognize its badness. But this is exactly the kind of queerness Mackie warned about. You are smuggling in a value. Suffering matters, and presenting it as a logical given, it isn't. It's a moral assumption. A committed Nietzschean could reply, suffering is what makes life meaningful. A Buddhist might say, suffering arises from attachment, and the solution is detachment, not minimizing suffering. A Stoic way says suffering is indifferent. None of these views are irrational. They simply start from different foundation values. And once you accept that foundational values are chosen rather than discovered, the entire utilitarian edifice, however internally consistent, become one of the coherent moral system among many, not that objectively correct one. Singer's realism is impressive, but rationality only works on the premises you feed it, and the premises of any moral system is ultimately matters of commitment, not discovery. And the premises of any moral system are ultimately matters of commitment, not discovery. Part 9. So what? The terrifying and liberating implications. Alright, let's sit with this. If morality does not exist, if morality does not exist as an objective feature of reality, if it's a construction, a story, an evolutionary adaptation dressed up in a language of cosmic truth, what follows? The first reaction most people have is panic. If morality isn't real, then anything goes. Murder, genocide, torture, all is fine. Society collapse. This reaction is understandable, but it rests on a confusion. The claim that objective moral facts does not exist is not to claim that nothing matters, or that your well-being and the well-being of others is irrelevant, not a practical prescription for how to live. Consider, you can deeply prefer that people not suffer, be committed to build a world where suffering is minimized, care profoundly about justice and compassion, all without believing that a cosmic moral fact is compelling to you to do so. Many of most ethical people in history have been non-believers who constructed their ethics consciously without divine backing or cosmic guarantee. But in fact, there is a strong argument that moral anti-realism produces better ethics than moral realism. When you believe that morality is objectively true, cosmically endorsed, you become dangerous. Every religious war in history, every inquisition, every genocide carried out in the name of righteousness was committed by people absolutely certain that they were on the side of objective moral truth. Certainty is the enemy of moral growth. The person who knows that they are right stops listening. But the people who understand that their morality is the construction, a chosen set of values, not a discovered set of facts, has every reason to examine those values critically, to update them in a face of argument and evidence, to hold them in conviction but without fanaticism. Nietzsche's hope, buried beneath the darkness of his moral critique, was precisely this, that once we stop pretending our values are given to us, we can begin to choose them consciously, to create values worthy of what we aspire to be, not as a slave to inherit moral system, not as a subject of cosmic moral law, but as what he called Overmesh, the human being who have seen through all old illusions, take responsibility for the values of creation himself. Sartre's hope was similar, that radical honesty about absence of pre-given values would produce not nihilism but authenticity, a more honest, more courageous, more genuine chosen way of living. Hume's quieter conclusion was that moral sentiments, through not cosmic facts, are real enough to organize decent society. You don't need God or Platonic forms to justify kindness. The fact that cruelty makes you feel bad and the fact that you are built for empathy and social connection is sufficient. And Mackie himself, despite arguing moral facts that doesn't exist, spent his career as an ethicist, working out which moral commitments are mostly worth making, because the absence of objective morality doesn't mean that absence of reason to be good. It just means that those reasons are yours. They don't come from outside. They are from your values, your empathy, your vision of what kind of world you want to live in. This is not nihilism, this is responsibility at its deepest. Part 10. The Final Truth. Morality as an ongoing human project. Here is what I actually believe. Having thought about all of this, morality is not a fantasy in a sense that it doesn't matter. It matters enormously. The rules and values we build together determine who lives and who dies, who flourishes, who suffers, what kind of civilization we pass to our children. But morality is a fantasy in a precise sense that is a story we tell, and we have always told about the universe carrying about how we treat each other, about righteousness and wrongdoing being woven into the fabric of reality, independent of human minds. That story is not true. What is true is that we are social creatures, built for evolution, for connections and empathy. What is true is the suffering is real and the capacity to elevate is also real. What is true that we are capable of extraordinary creativity in how we organize our lives together. What is true that we have the remarkable ability to examine our inherited values, criticize them, and consciously choose better ones. Morality is not discovered, it is built. And that means that responsibility for its entirety ours, not God's to appeal to, no cosmic scoreboard to point at, no objective moral law to hide behind when we do terrible things in its name, just us. With everything we know, making choice about what kind of world we want. That's not a comfortable thought, but it is, I think, the honest one. And perhaps honesty is the beginning of actually being good. Hume showed us that we cannot derive an out from an is. That is, morality floats free of fact, anchored only in feelings. Nietzsche showed us that our deepest moral convictions have a history, a genealogy of power and resentment that we are almost never told. Mackie showed us that moral facts, if they existed, would be so metaphysically strange that we have every reason to doubt them. Haidt shows us that our moral institutions are emotional reaction first and realization second. And Sartre showed us that in a universe without pre-given essence, the weight of value creation falls entirely on our shoulders. None of these means nothing matters. It means you decide what matters consciously, deliberately, without the comfort of cosmic endorsement. This is the most serious philosophical responsibility a person can take on, so take it seriously. If this video made you question something you were certain of, then good, that's what philosophy is for. Leave your thoughts below. I want to know what you believe about morality and whether it changes anything. See you in the next one.